Hello and welcome. The power of Israel's lobby in the United States is something of an open secret, which became that much more public recently. The fact that the issue was highly visible in the media has opened a debate on exactly who pulls the strings in the government. Ambassador Charles Freeman, known as Chaz, was chosen last month by the Obama administration for one of the country's top intelligence jobs, chairman of the National Intelligence Council. Within hours, pro-Israel advocates launched a major offensive to make sure Chaz Freeman's selection did not stand. And 3 weeks later, he withdrew his name from consideration. What was his crime? Well, he occasionally criticized the Israeli government's position on some key issues and U.S. support for those policies. Chaz Freeman was a former U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia and has held top posts in both the defense and State Departments. And today we speak with Ambassador Freeman on his experience and the role of the Israel lobby in shaping policy in Washington. Ambassador, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Judging by some of the things you'd said prior to the whole incident, it was obvious you knew something might come up. But were you surprised at how public it all went?
Oh, indeed. I knew I would be controversial because I've frankly been quite indifferent to political correctness. And the whole name of the game in this instance was to ensure that the intelligence community produced results, reached conclusions which were politically correct or convenient, and didn't go outside into more realistic and objective conclusions.
We had loads of emails and questions that came in when we said you were coming on the show, and I'm going to put one that came into our live station chat room on the internet from Paul in Germany. Now, Paul wrote in saying, Senator Schumer said Freeman's statements were way over the top. I repeatedly urged the White House to reject him, and I'm glad they did the right thing. Is the Israel lobby so powerful that it takes direct influence on such issues?
Well, in this case, it was a small group of people who are closely aligned with Likud and perhaps the Israel Beitena movement in Israel, the far right in Israel, who have their supporters here as well. They took this up, and essentially they created a situation in which it became apparent that my presence at the National Intelligence Council would be constantly used to denigrate its products and to discredit them. And I concluded with Admiral Blair that it would be in the best interest of the Council and my country for me to step down. I don't know what Mr. Schumer said to the White House. It had no bearing on my decision.
You know, interestingly enough, we had an email that came in from Manchester in the UK, and Faisal Dama said, you can't hold a high or influential post in government or as a member of Congress or the Senate unless you swear allegiance to Israel first and America second. And you better have a clean record of not leaning towards Arabs or Muslims. I remember Obama stating in a speech just after he took office that he will make it hard for lobbyists to penetrate and influence government, which is what they did under Bush. Now, the whole change thing doesn't look like it's taken hold yet. So what does this say about the freedom of the Obama administration to be able to make decisions to pick key people where it wants to?
Well, I think it's unfortunate in that context, but it's very early days. In fact, I take some pleasure in the thought that this whole incident has opened up an area for debate. It has eroded a taboo on public discussion that has been in place for far too long. I had enormous outpourings of support from many in the American Jewish community, the majority of which simply doesn't agree with Avigdor Lieberman and people of that sort in Israel and don't want to be associated with him.
Interesting you mentioned the support you had from the Jewish community. In the live station chat room, we had a question from Pierre, who said, why can't Arab countries form an Arab lobby to counter AIPAC, the Israel lobby, the pro-Israel lobby? And it makes me also ask you about what you've sort of said is your sort of disillusionment with the way the Arab community didn't stand behind you in this incident.
Well, there is an Arab lobby mainly in the imagination of the Israel lobby. It doesn't exist in reality. Arab Americans have not been active very much in our politics. They're beginning to take a role, but they tend to act on behalf of their native country rather than on behalf of pan-Arab or Islamic issues. Foreign societies, those with money in the Gulf and elsewhere, simply don't make the effort. I suppose they say to themselves, Kul Shei Maktub, everything has been written, so why bother? So it's a very ineffectual effort, and very little money is put into it, and you get what you pay for, which is nothing.
Does that explain, though, why, as much as you got support from many people who, are Jewish and perhaps even pro-Israel in their own way, you still didn't really get the kind of people standing behind you from the Arab community you would need?
Well, there wasn't any effort that I could see, but then they don't have much influence in the Congress, and so I wasn't disillusioned or surprised.
It's interesting to read some of your comments from time to time on how the American public doesn't see the real picture in the Middle East. And I know there was a time you were in Abu Dhabi and happened to witness on local media and read in the papers, witness something that was a home video of a Palestinian youth being pulled out and shot by Israeli plainclothes policemen, and it made you realize that the story doesn't hit home here. How do you regard the US media in this? Is it a case of just self-censorship?
I think it's a combination of things. To the extent that it involves violence and bloodshed, there's a tendency by our media not to show things because they air the news at dinner time and they think it's too disturbing to put that sort of thing on. But I don't think there's any question whatsoever that there's a strong institutional bias on the part of our media against airing anything that is favorable, particularly to the Palestinian cause. It's simply dismissed out of hand. And what we tend to hear in this country is very one-sided.
Interestingly enough, an email came in from Deborah in Kansas, here in the US, who said, I read Haaretz, the Israeli paper, and find its dialogue refreshing and wish we had it here. We have no balance here. There is no Palestinian side. I would guess that less than 10% of Americans know anything about President Jimmy Carter's book about the Palestinians, apartheid in the West Bank. And that's a key thing that even Jimmy Carter took a lot of flack for raising this issue.
Well, I think the lady in Kansas has got it right. Haaretz is a great newspaper. Israeli democracy is vigorous. These issues are debated very openly in Israel. The same people who do that in Israel when they come here are silenced. So I don't think the issue becomes improper because it moves 6,000 miles to the United States. And I think we need to correct this.
Gaza, of course, was a huge story in the Middle East. Didn't seem to have much of a hearing here, though it did get a little more publicity than perhaps previous issues regarding the Israeli-Palestinian situation. Looking at it from the American perspective, what did you see here that might help to change minds, hearts and minds even?
Well, now the Israeli press, Haaretz in particular, is opening the door on many things that happened during the Gaza campaign, which are quite disturbing. The elements of sort of religious jihad, if you will, by the army, incited by nationalist rabbis to slaughter everyone they encountered, the use of improper methods, the indiscriminate killing of civilians. All of these things are coming out from people in Israel who have a conscience, and they're being echoed to some extent in the American press. But again, not with the vigor that they are being discussed in Israel proper.
I've interviewed a few guests on this issue, and some say that there is a turning point now, that Israel's actions, particularly in Gaza, have perhaps rolled the sort of ball off the cliff, that this is a bit like the apartheid situation in South Africa, something that can actually be a major precursor for change, that perhaps Israel's hold on the American public's hearts and minds isn't going to be so strong now.
Well, I hope that our media and our public debate now open up and allow criticism of Israeli policies that people like myself regard as deeply injurious to Israel as well as to our own country's interests. That has not been the case. Many people have told me that they believe that the airing of my situation and the revelations about the despicable methods that were used to defame my character by members of this Likud lobby has in fact opened up room for debate. I hope that's the case.
Interestingly enough, also, I know that you've commented on the blogosphere being used, the internet and the sort of online community, to discredit you, to wage a campaign against you. And I wonder if the awareness of that information there isn't so regulated as it is in the traditional media, perhaps has become a little more out in the public domain, and people might think twice about this. Could this kind of campaign occur again, with people aware of it?
Well, the blogosphere, it turns out, is a wonderful place to organize a lynch mob. Which is what was done in my case. There's no requirement for fact-checking. There are serious journalists who've been driven to the blogosphere. There are also a lot of people who are impersonating journalists who are really polemicists in a very thin disguise. So the problem with that medium is that, unlike the one that we're participating in, it tends to be compartmented. People of like mind communicate with other people of the same view. They inhale the same stale arguments without any challenge. And if they communicate with others of different viewpoint, they do so very often with invective rather than reason.
Those in the traditional media who supported you wrote basically this was another example of intimidation by the pro-Israel lobby in the US. And I wonder if this idea of the intimidation, considering your debates out in the open, whether the intimidation factor is as strong. There are those who say lobbyists have to work quietly, and now, of course, the Israel lobby is a little more visible. Perhaps it can lose its strength.
Well, I think the issue of intimidation came through particularly in the comments that were made to me by members of the American Jewish community, the majority of which does not support either this kind of suppression of debate and free speech or the substantive policies that the Israeli right wing is promoting. And they feel greatly intimidated, and it was their hope, those who communicated with me, that in fact the thuggish behavior of this particular element in the Israel lobby would now be subjected to some sort of check and balance.
Well, Ambassador, we've got more questions for you. We're going to have more after a short break. We'll speak with Ambassador Chaz Freeman again. We'll be right back with that, so stay tuned.